And now to another important story of the day. A State Bank of India research report reveals the growth in the average income of middle-class Indians in the past decade. The report predicts a promising future, with the average income anticipated to exceed by 7 times by 2047. This growth will result from a combination of factors, including more individual filing taxes and a shift in the distribution of tax filers from the lower to the higher income brackets. Now, armed with this report, the BJP claims the vindication on the economic front, asserting that Indian middle class has expanded, incomes have gone up, and on the economic front, the key attacks coming in from the opposition are unsubstantiated. In contrast, the opposition parties contend that the research has not factored in inflation and various other factors, and it is far too early, or it's jumping to a conclusion to argue that the incomes for the middle class have tripled. How much of substance really exists in this report? The Prime Minister has also written about it. We talk about all of these facets on Viewpoint tonight.
के आर्थिक संकट और कंटक को पछाड़ करके भारत जो है वो सबसे तेजी से बढ़ती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था साबित हुई है, तो निश्चित तौर से हर व्यक्ति पर इसका असर पड़ेगा, इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा.
It's not a very surprising term. The question is what's happening to the rest of India. Okay, middle class is what, about 10, 15, 20, 25% of India. There are very, very serious reports that real wages, which is real wages of unskilled and skilled laborers, has actually been going down. The kind of growth that we are seeing in the economy is not being reflected both in agriculture and in agricultural labor.
Well, the key argument that this particular report makes is about the middle class in this country, that the incomes for middle class have increased. Let's come to the definition. Let's talk about it threadbare. What exactly is middle class? Is there actually a definition that exists for it? The average income boom, what should be that income increase for us to conclude anything? Here is what the SBI report says. Now, in 2014, India's weighted mean income was about 4.4 lakh crore rupees. By 2023, it has risen to about 13 lakh crore rupees, and it is projected to further increase to about 49.7 lakh rupees. Look at these numbers. Now, this should be read with two factors in mind. One is the fact that, yes, the incomes are rising. People are earning more. That's the hallmark of any developing nation, an aspirational nation like India. The second is also the factor that more people have now come under the quote-unquote formal economy. About 70% of Indian economy is quote-unquote informal, which has been out of the tax ambit in many, many ways. Experts argue that with the introduction of the GST, income tax return, tax ambit expanding, more and more people are getting quote-unquote formalized in a certain sense. Middle class income has been tripled. That is one of the claims that has been made. There is no universal definition of what middle class is. There are indicators, there are expert panels that have commented upon what exactly is the middle class. Now, household earnings between 5 lakh and 30 lakh annually. Even in the middle class, there is a categorization. What has been done? The category has been divided into seekers and strivers. These are some of the leading reports that we are citing to you. This is sometimes not taken as the official position. Seekers earn about 5 to 15 lakh and strivers earn about 15 to 30 lakh. So anything between 5 to 30, one categorizes it as a middle class. Growing at a rate of about 6.3% per year between 1995 and 2021, and the middle class represents about 31% of the Indian population. This is expected to reach 38% by 2031 and 60% by 2047. By simple deduction, this is more and more people rising from the income levels, from the lower income levels, to the higher income levels. So this is largely about what exactly is middle class and what are the categorizations that have been done. Let's talk about the poverty estimates. We cannot talk about the rise in the income of the middle class without talking about the number of people who have come out of poverty. They might be two separate issues but closely interlinked to each other. The objective of any government is to ensure that more and more people come out of poverty so that they come into the bracket of what we term as middle class. Between 1993 to 94, in rural areas about 50.1%, urban areas 31.8%, across the country about 45.3%. In 2004 to 5, rural areas about 41.8%, urban areas about 25.7%, and the country roughly at 37.2% number of people coming out of poverty. 2011 to 12, rural areas about 25.7, urban areas about 13.7, across the country about 21.9, a massive drop in the number of people. But I must also point out there was this huge controversy about what exactly is the poverty line. The Planning Commission at one point during the UPA was criticized because they defined and tweaked the definition of what a poverty line really is. This has always remained contested in our country. But the fact that middle class is growing is a good sign, is a healthy sign for any economy. Let's take these questions. Let's take all these facets to the two big newsmakers who are joining us on Viewpoint tonight. Good evening to both of you. We have Mr. T.S. Singhdeo, who is the Deputy Chief Minister for the state of Chhattisgarh. We also have Mr. Nilesh Shah, who is the member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and the Managing Director of Kotak. Sir, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Shah, for speaking to us on the broadcast. I'll take the questions to you first. I'm sure you must have heard about this report. The Prime Minister has also written about this SBI report. Is it fair to conclude on the basis of this particular report, on the basis of the income tax returns, that the middle class in this country has expanded?
So there are three Indias in some sense. One India which has per capita GDP of France. One India which has per capita GDP of a middle income country like Indonesia, and one India which is still living at per capita GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. Undoubtedly, there is a shift of people from living standard of sub-Saharan Africa to middle income standard like Indonesia, and from middle income standard like Indonesia to developed world like France.
Right.
Obviously, there are lots of people living at sub-Saharan Africa level, but there is also a fact that a lot of people are shifting upwards, and that is what SBI report has demonstrated using income tax data. There is upward mobility for living standards in terms of per capita GDP from bottom to middle and from middle to top.
So I understand the various categorizations within the middle class that you're making, and that leads us to a more informed discussion about the story of rising India. That's also something that the Prime Minister spoke of. But in your understanding, in your experience, as I argued earlier, there is also a lot of consolidation that has happened in Indian economy, with the more informal sectors, quote unquote, becoming formalized in many ways. The tax ambit has also increased. I go back to the SBI report. Is there data, is there substance to argue and conclude and reach to the point that there has been a rise in the income of the middle class, to put it simply to you?
Undoubtedly. And in last 10 years, India has become from 10th largest economy to 5th largest economy globally.
Yes.
We are on our way to become third largest economy over next 7 to 8 years. This growth is driven in some sense by the per capita growth in India's GDP.
Right.
So there is a remarkable movement from bottom to middle and middle to top in terms of GDP as well as per capita income in last 10 years.
So I want to touch about the two factors that I spoke of. The increasing tax ambit. This is something that this SBI report also talks about, that more and more people are now filing tax returns. The number of people who have come forward and filed tax return has only increased with time. The fact that GST has played a huge role. Is this consolidation of the informal economy? And if yes, are we likely to see this consolidation in the future as well? And is that one aspect that we should keep in mind while reading the results of this SBI report?
So when GST was launched, there were about 60 lakh business units which were paying GST or registered under GST. Now that number is about 1.3 crore. This almost 100% plus increase in GST registered entities is due to both the things. One, some registered entities which were not paying GST earlier are now paying, and some new entities have come. As we have moved from $1.8 trillion to $3.7 trillion economy, formalization of economy has happened, but also newer ventures in newer businesses have created growth opportunity.
Absolutely. So, there's the facet of how many people have been pushed out of poverty. I certainly don't want you to talk about the politics around this issue, but one of the key arguments which is often made is that the government must substantiate, or any government for that matter must substantiate, the number of people it has been able to pull out of poverty, and only then we can make an argument that the middle class has expanded. Though these two arguments may be separate in nature but are deeply correlated and interlinked. How much merit in this argument that more and more people have been lifted out of poverty? Because some argue there is not enough data to argue that.
So there are multiple ways to point out differentiated facts. There was a time when government subsidies had huge leakages. Whether it was 50% or 80%, that is anybody's guess. Today, thanks to Jan Dhan Mobile and Aadhaar, direct benefit transfer is possible. Government benefits reach out to intended recipients and leakages have practically become zero. Undoubtedly, when benefits reach to recipients, it results into lifting out of poverty. The second thing is per capita GDP. If we look at per capita GDP from below $2,000, it is now $2,600.
That's right.
Some have benefited more, some have benefited less. But undoubtedly, the entire Indian ship has been lifted.
Yes.
On one side, we are providing free food to 80 crore Indians because of COVID pandemic. Now that also will mean reduction in poverty as more people are able to get nutrition. In India, whatever you say, opposite is also true, because as I mentioned, there are three Indias. Some people enjoying French level per capita GDP, some people enjoying Indonesian level per capita GDP, and many people, unfortunately, suffering from sub-Saharan Africa GDP. If you look at them, you will feel like India is poor and backward. If you look at other side, you realize that India has indeed moved forward.
So you talk about the different level of poverty, sub-Saharan African level of poverty. How many people we've been able to pull out from those levels of poverty? I believe that should be a point of discussion as we talk about rising India.
So instead of looking at past, we should look at future. Why are poor people in India? Well, in 1980, India and China were similar in per capita GDP. Today, China is 5.5 times bigger than us. China became manufacturer to the world. We were left behind. Now, fortunately, the bus which we missed in 1980 is available again. Globally, people want to shift their business out of China because of China plus one policy pursued by Western world. We have to ensure that this time we don't miss that bus. All the global companies, we bring them to India, help them set up their large factories, create jobs, create development, create growth, and ensure that everyone is lifted below poverty line to above poverty line. I think the biggest opportunity for India today is to become manufacturer to the world,
Yes.
capturing China plus one opportunity.
Right.
If we can create 10, 15 crore jobs and shift people from agriculture to manufacturing stroke services, that will change India's growth orbit and move a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa style, sub-Saharan Africa level GDP to middle income GDP.
So, absolute pleasure always to listen to you, but I'll reiterate on the first question that I'd asked you as we began this discussion. Is it fair to conclude on the basis of a report whose core data are the income tax returns that the income levels for the middle class has increased, or perhaps we need more data for that?
So undoubtedly in India, income tax is not paid uniformly or
Yes.
inequality by all. Salaried class income tax compliance is comparable to Western world. But in agriculture, there is no tax. There are many farmers who are earning crores of rupees and are not paying any tax, so we will never know what's happening on agriculture side.
Right.
On business, tax compliance is improving, but it is still comparable to African nation standards, not comparable to Asian nation standards. So income tax is giving us directionally what is happening through better compliance in business and full compliance in salaried class. It demonstrates that in India, more people are becoming richer and are paying tax. But there is still a reasonable part of parallel economy where many people are not paying their fair share of tax.
All right, sir, it's an absolute pleasure to always have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and thoughts with us on the show. We have another esteemed guest joining us here on Viewpoint tonight. We have Mr. K.V. Subramanian, who's the former Chief Economic Advisor. He's with us on the show. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Always a pleasure to have you. I'm sure you must have heard about the SBI report. I hope you've had the opportunity to go through it. But the moot point that this report makes is that the income levels are rising for the middle class. And this is based on the data that was provided by the income tax return or the income tax records that have really come in. Your preliminary thoughts on this report, how valid is this assertion in your expertise?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Look, we have to first factor in that any prediction about the future is often affected by some uncertainty.
Right.
I think with that caveat, I would say that the projections that are being made by the SBI report are quite reasonable. One thing that I know very well, having tracked the work that Soumyakanti Ghosh does, he does use, brings in new data sets to bring in, fresh perspectives. I'll try and complement, what the SBI report says, using some thoughts of my own, but from a macroeconomic side. If you look at it from a macroeconomic side, India's, in the next 20-25 years, India is in an incredibly sweet spot from the perspective of the demographics. In a situation where China's population is going to be declining in the next 20-25 years, the advanced economies all have aging population.
That's right.
India is going to be in this incredible sweet spot for the next 20-25 years. Now, many people will contend that can become a liability. But the steps that have been taken, especially on manufacturing sector growth, because manufacturing sector growth is incredibly important for job creation in the economy. And in the next 25 years, that will be a big driver of job creation and thereby the creation of middle class. I'll give you one example. If you take, for instance, Detroit in the state of Michigan in the United States, the entire city was created by jobs that were provided by the three automobile majors. So in a similar way, when manufacturing sector jobs will get created, the demographics, the sweet spot that we have will indeed become a dividend. And overall, we can expect about 7% growth, 6.5% to 7% growth, in real terms going forward. And that, and that will make a big difference, when you're talking about 25 years, because the power of compounding actually makes a big difference there.
The power of compounding, absolutely. And the demographic dividend that India has, that's also one thing that the report talks about. But I want you to touch upon these aspects, not inviting a political comment in any way. But one of the key criticism of this growth story, or the people who are skeptical about India's growth story, is that you don't have data to argue how many people you have pushed out of poverty, or the fact that the incomes have risen along with inflation. That's a factor that needs to be accounted into. Could you help us understand the correlation between inflation and the rising incomes, and how should that be understood?
See, here I think we can speak with very good data, because when you look at inflation, we get monthly data. If you look at the average, average inflation from 1960 to 2020, that average inflation was 7.2%. Just as a comparison, United States, during the same period, 60-year period, their average inflation was 2%.
That's right.
Now, because of the way in which India handled the economy, and, I was incredibly privileged to be part of that team that actually was able to, think through this. India's inflation actually is less than its historical average. I do keep in mind the latest print that has come, 7.4%. It's a lot more because of food inflation. But overall, if you look at the trends, our inflation has actually been much lower than the advanced economies, which are facing anywhere between 2.5 to 4 times the historical average inflation. Okay. And this is with a growth that is actually likely to be of 5% plus, in FY23. So when you project from this going forward, and let me come to the jobs part, and I think that is something that there is a lot of bad sort of narrative making on employment, in particular in India. I would go by the PLFS data, because that is official data, which has been the methodology has really been approved. Unfortunately, a lot of people comment using the extremely unreliable, noisy CMIE data. If you go by the PLFS data, and we covered this in the economic surveys that I wrote as well,
that's right.
From 2017-18 to 2019-20, the number of people who are salaried workers, or drawing are in the formal sector, drawing salaried a salary, that had increased by almost by 15 million. And of that, about 7 million was females, which was a growth of about 30%, and 8 million among males. So on the employment, I think for various reasons the narratives are actually are very poor. But when you look at the data, a lot misinformed. And I think misinformed, and oftentimes there are a few who actually, unfortunately also want to sort of push the wrong narratives. But the data speaks for itself. And I also would mention that if you look at the PLFS data again, post-COVID, there has been very good recovery, except for females, where the recovery was not very V-shaped. Right. So the decline was steep, but then gone up. But if you look at all the measures,
and who better than you to remind the political parties or the people or anybody who's loosely commenting about the force of data? Mr. Subramanian, it's always very enlightening, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for putting all the details into perspective. That was Mr. K.V. Subramanian talking about the report that has come out from the SBI. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. Let me quickly cut across to Mr. T.S. Singh Deo as well, the Deputy Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh. Sir, first, your initial thoughts on this report. Do you agree? BJP argues middle class income has grown.
I don't know what conclusions they want to draw. If it is just a matter of statistics, which indicates that the people taking loans from the SBI or the data with the SBI indicates that the mean income level has gone up compared to 2013. Well, that is data which probably cannot be refuted. As far as there are other imputations or computations or projections that would be made, that could be a matter of discussion.
But sir, in the run-up to 2024, one of the key arguments that was made by the opposition party, including the rights of Rahul Gandhi, is that the economy has not done well, and more importantly, this government has not delivered on tangible front like jobs, employment, inflation, and various other facets. So, with this report and the assertion of the government, does the criticism of the opposition still hold?
For me, inflation, unemployment, and the economic factors are very important, but for me, they are not the most important, frankly. For me, the most important factor would be the fabric, the political fabric, the social fabric, the religious fabric of the country, which is extremely stressed today. Constitutional issues that are being raised, for me, they are extremely important. So is the economic condition, undoubtedly. But is that the only issue on which the opposition will go to the elections? I do not think it will have such a limited view. There are many, many pressing issues, very basic issues that reflect upon and which have the potential to disturb the country as we have known it, constitutionally, socially, religiously, regionally. Those are the issues, I think, which should be number one, and certainly following close behind would be issues that affect the individual, which is the economic aspect.
Mr. T.S. Singh, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. While the jury might be out, most of the people who understand data and statistics would argue that economy has done well on various indicators. Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Viewpoint. Plain Speak follows with Shivani Gupta. Thank you for watching.